We don't have a lot of time, but if I can ask my presenters and guests to join me here. And I was hoping that we could have had like a little bit longer conversation amongst us, but I think to be fair, let's just first open it to the crowd because they have endured like a full day of activities. So Victor, and then see who will want to ask a question from whichever. Manuel and like everybody, I mean, you know who you are. I'm gonna like preside in the middle. No, I'm not gonna do that. Why don't you, sir, sit in the middle? Yeah, I'm gonna sit. And then please. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I sit here. Yeah, totally. So yeah, so question, guys, please. I mean, it's been a full day of like intensities. Anybody has a question? Yeah, go ahead. You have a question? Yeah. So you were next. You do have a question. Hold on to it for that.
Can we go for dinner? It doesn't work.
Okay, I have a question to Alan about like what you call containerization and computerization. Like, is there, like, how, like, is like my question is, can you explain a little bit if there's also this, like, the idea of isolation involved, like, and
yeah, well, you know, there's two sides to this because originally I wrote about containerization in my book in terms of the organizational structure of the war on terror. If you're familiar with corporate form of containerization, which extends now into these shipping technologies that Anselm Franke intelligently documented in this film in The World, or forgotten, I've written exactly in the film. Containerization also becomes a strategy for transnational corporations who outsource or relocate themselves in non-sovereign territory from where they derive from in order to escape accountability. And we can see the logic of containerization in the war on terror, which becomes shifting from one geopolitical site to the other. And the ultimate example of containerization is the drone weapon, which is a kind of floating form of sovereignty, because you know the basic definition of the sovereign is the right to kill, and drones I begin to read as kind of floating multiple prosthetic apparatuses of sovereignty. So that's sovereignty containerized. But of course, in jail, in prisons, in the slave ship, containerization was part of isolating this amassed population. Through de-individualization and through a competition of scarce resources as well. And certainly you have that in Guantanamo, and forced feeding is an ultimate form of isolation in which you are separated from your own body. Because what happens if you go on hunger strike, your will is being displaced by the autonomic will of your body, which does gather nutrients from these substances of the state. And we really have to think about them as state substances that are projected like a drone weapon, like a missile, into the interior of the hunger striker's body. So yes, it certainly involves isolation and atomization and singularization. But again, there's always going to be this tension between atomization and the exemplification that the singularized other who's being containerized is representative of a type of a specimen, whether that's the terrorist or the slave or the person with a compromised immune system.
Hello? I will do it without a microphone. Oh, it works. I also have a question for you, Alan. This cockroach you were talking about, doesn't it likely turn out that this cockroach will turn into a fascist or something? Because it will...
Well, in Greece, if you want to deal with the specific historical context, those people, the Golden Dawn was not an apparatus that was demonstrating in front of Syntagma Square. So Golden Dawn, sorry, God, it was not a political movement that was part of those protests. What they did was to cast blame not on Merkel or not on previous governments, but on migrants in Greece, and to enact xenophobic violence against migrants, including the killing of a black rapper in Athens several years ago. So they turned their anger and their energies and passions to the expulsion of the immigrant. And actually what happens in Athens is that those folks who were demonstrating against the imposition of odious debt by the EU developed what they called social motions, which were social movements like social pharmacies where people would get free medication, neighborhood places where farmers could sell directly to consumers. And part of that was immigrant advice centers where these folks were giving advice to immigrants who are in Greece who needed naturalization, who needed economic advice, who needed medical assistance or some type of support structure. And what Golden Dawn began doing was firebombing these advice centers in Athens and other parts of Greece, which wounded both immigrants and indigenous Greek activists.
So you think that the process of dehumanization does not lead to fascism? That's what you say, right?
In the case of the Greek left, no, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite, because it was, what you see happening is a separation and a detachment and a kind of rupture between, in the concept of citizenship. Citizenship in contemporary Greece is not a matter of who you are, immigrant or not, natally born Greek or immigrant. It's a question of what you do. And you see several forms of citizenship emerging in contemporary Greece. You have exceptional citizenship, like those folks demonstrating and occupying Syntagma Square under those horrific conditions. Then you have antagonistic citizenship, where citizenship is posed against the state apparatus. And finally, you have what I would call performative citizenship, or a process of citizenizing. Moving away from the kind of bourgeois citoyen structure of middle-class society that had been implemented by the Enlightenment, and developing new forms of citizenship. And this goes back to 5th century Athenian democracy, to the Solonic laws, where Solon basically legislated that it was the duty of the citizen to take sides in a civil war, which is what's going on in Greece. To take sides. It was part of citizenship. To stay neutral was to betray your citizenship. So it was a duty of the citizens to make civil war, if history brought them to that circumstance, but also to make the peace. So that's citizenship as performance, performative citizenship, which is different than citizenship as an essentialized identity based on papers.
Matteo, do you want to? Because
I have a question for Alan. Can we?
Oh, but you know what? We can't just keep asking Alan questions because there were so many presenters, and I have some questions too.
Is Syriza then a big cockroach? Or do you see the possibility of super cockroaches? I mean, cockroaches that emerge, through the consolidation of network of solidarity, like Syriza, because Syriza was rooted in movement, and of course the dialectics between movement and the party. So the big cockroach.
It's not a big cockroach. It's a form of constituted power, and it's part of the state apparatus, and parcel of any social movement is to engage in what Castoriadis, Greek philosopher, called self-constituting power. I mean, you do understand the distinction between potentia and potestas. Are you familiar with that distinction? Potentia is comes from Machiavelli, among others. Potentia is already constituted power, and then potestas is already constituted power. And potentia is power in the making. Political subjects in the making, in the self-making, in the process of self-design. And that's where the cockroach emerges from, not from already constituted institutional politics, but self-making and self-design on the street.
So I'm gonna if you guys have a question for Amanda or Victoria, go ahead. Otherwise, I want to ask a question and kind of like relate their discourse. But go ahead. Anybody has a question?
I have a more practical question concerning the execution of the lecture, especially for the 3 first lectures. So I was wondering whether actually you have thought of ways that it could be executed in a more fluid way rather than just reading a paper that we could most likely find online as well. Especially thinking that this is mainly lectures for students. So if that's just a de facto that we are okay reading right now this paper, then maybe you could give some advice on what we could do in order that we decode this very hard vocabulary that you have been using, unless I just feel a bit stupid.
Yeah, I believe we have a Greek speaking, right? Kombados.
Yes, I guess the question was for me,
that could
right?
be done, certainly. We have a pedagogical responsibility and accountability, and it's part and parcel of kind of reciprocal hospitality to engage in further discussions. And that's one of the problems of these type of events, that the speakers who come from abroad really get a chance to sit down and meet with students. For example, Mo was doing that yesterday in the cafeteria or the cafe with students who had questions about one of the presentations yesterday. And that we need more of that type of open-ended space.
So I want to ask a question because I saw. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's a very fair point, but I think there's also a way in which, let's say, this kind of dialectic between audience and presenter already presumes a certain kind of power relation, right? So we're invited to kind of perform our research, or at least to kind of share some sort of insights that we have gained through our previous experiences. We're given a certain slot, and we also know that we'll be talking to our colleagues, and in effect we have to kind of fulfill 2 functions. We need to say something meaningful to the people who are sitting here and comprehensible, and simultaneously we need to make interesting claims for our colleagues. And I think that's quite a big burden. And it's a lot to ask, I think, from speakers to, within half an hour to present in these two ways, in a sort of fluid, and it takes a lot of experience, I think. And you do raise a very fair point, but perhaps altering this format that's maybe more like a workshop format or seminar-led format would actually encourage that sort of engagement. So it's a slightly defensive answer, but hopefully covers some of it.
But we're here, not going anywhere.
Well, I mean, I just want to back up what Victoria's saying to some degree, but also I just want to say that, and it kind of maybe talks to Manuel's film a little bit, maybe in that romantic side, but it's true that we're here. And if you read the paper, which is not online, by the way, but if you read the paper, if you did ever read it, you can't ask me a question because I won't be there, and therefore the question's wasted that you just asked, because you're asking about pedagogical formats, which is pretty kind of not that interesting. So I think there's other questions to ask that are actually more important about what the people around me have been talking about. There's lots of other papers online about pedagogical method as well.
Can I ask a question?
Should we not open it up to the audience, because that's the aim?
I want questions about earlier presentations too, because...
There we go.
Hi, I wasn't here the whole day, but I had a question to Matteo on his presentation. I was thinking about, I just was going through my notes, and you were using the term self-reflexive when you were...
Which term?
Self-reflexive.
Self-reflexive.
Self-reflective. When you were talking about intelligent machines and computers. And I'm just curious about if you believe that computers or artificial intelligence schemes can be self-reflective.
Self-reflexive means...
yeah, okay, it's two different words. I think I mean self-reflective, but I'm not sure if that was the word you used.
Yeah, I said self-reflexive apparatus, something like that, probably.
Okay.
But, I mean, the machines are not, they don't have consciousness. I mean, or if they have, I mean, it's another. But that's like technophilia. The point is, I mean, we had these models of, we had self-reflexive apparatuses in the natural world. What is happening today is like, if we have to discuss, since the 50s, cybernetics developing something more complex. And we have today an alliance between our, I don't know, consciousness, intelligence mode of also governing the state and these machines. I don't know, if you think even the drones, there is a lot of literature and studies today on the drone as a physical entity, on the command chain behind the drone. But the drone, especially in Afghanistan and Pakistan, are driven by databases. I mean, when they select precisely one of this target that Adam was referring to, when they do signature strike, they just go through this gigantic data set, they select, they find the pattern and they think this is the pattern, and they kill in that way people without knowing the identity, just on the basis their pattern of behavior is identical or similar to the pattern of behavior of a previous terrorist. That is super fantastic military apparatus of intelligence, of cognition. I don't think, I don't probably referring, and then this part, you know, anyway, of the military apparatuses that we use today. But yeah, this is an example, for instance, of something self-reflective, but not autonomous in the sense of autonomous consciousness. I don't know. 5 years. 5 years. I mean, also these machine learning things, machine learning algorithms, for instance, are a better word for artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is pretty useless as a term. It's completely misleading. And these machine learning algorithms are imitation machine. So we use the term intelligence always in the wrong way. If you even in the intelligence community, sorry, in the artificial intelligence community, they use the term. But you see, today is the hegemony and predominance of model based on machine learning algorithm. And within those are like just imitation, statistical imitation machine. So if you want to, you know, debunk the myth of intelligence in this case.
My own latest research in the last couple of months have taken me from the study in cybernetics to sort of like a little bit of psychoanalysis, but very specifically into what Lacan wrote on cybernetics, and then how Friedrich Kittler interpreted Lacan's significant contribution to cybernetics. And my understanding of it is that for those type of machines to emerge, you got to have a similar situation with a human in which the space for reception of data is much larger than the amount of information coming in. So then this empty space requires some kind of overproduction of signs by the machinic, whatever it is. And I don't think our machines have reached that ability yet to be able to. But I don't think it's something like Adam said, give them 5 years. I don't think it's something that like one breakthrough in hard drive might make some changes. So I don't hold it forever that like our machines won't be able to have that type of like ego capacity, as like Lacan puts it, in order to sort of like have that power to hesitate, and in this hesitation think about past and the future at the same time, and create new like add to the symbolic order in ways that it would like somehow resemble humans. But we're not there yet. I mean, we can all agree that we're not there yet. But I want to ask a question about art from Victoria and Amanda, which is like in these overlap, right? Because both of you are critical of the sort of like the dominant paradigm of contemporary art, but you both see rooms in it for not improvement, but maybe for sort of like hijacking, hacking, or taking over, but in a very like cunning way, not like a simplistic occupy way, but sort of like how to utilize the space. And you know what I mean? And I mean it in ways that like I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for global contemporary art to have some kind of relationship to human rights, myself. I don't think, but how to turn that into something good is the question. And like in terms of your presentation, I think that emphasis on the fact that art is separate, or art is not separate, sorry, bad word. Art is related but different than computational order is not necessarily about, I mean reason is different, I'm not talking about reason, but like keeping some kind of like distinction between what art does and what art communication does can itself be exploited in favor of reason. The same way that like this dependence of contemporary art on neoliberal logic of human rights can itself be exploited.
I think the crucial thing for me really, because I'm interested in policy, I think that's pretty clear from my presentation, but I'm also interested in understanding what leverages there are to exploit within a certain system for, let's say, positive and kind of progressive social change. And I think within the human rights system from the very start, I mentioned that during the presentation, there had been certain dysfunctionalities that had been built into it in order to actually make it a really easy system to capitalize upon for geopolitical goals that are actually very different to, let's say, the positive aims of the human rights regime, yet simultaneously to make it rather toothless when it comes to implementation, to actually basically creating some sort of positive results. Whereas with the contemporary art system, this is taken to a new height in the sense that there is no leverage for transformation, because transformation is, as I mentioned, this kind of closed loop feedback process where you're constantly kind of put into this position of experiencing yourself as, as a liberated, emancipated individual, however, that is not really attached to any claims. So my kind of attempt is to see how this sort of liberal reality of the contemporary art regime can be used to find these leverages. And I think in this respect, we do need the legal infrastructure. And maybe not in the liberal form in which it appears within the human rights regime, but I think some sort of kind of leverage that allows you to achieve transformations that are scalable is absolutely paramount. So in a sense, the contemporary art field is a really good sort of prototyping space, because you can, build on transdisciplinary knowledges. You can test things that within the actual field of politics are not really, that we kind of frowned upon and that wouldn't be taken seriously. But then the question is, how do you make that jump from our insular reality here into kind of scalable societal infrastructures? And for me, that is still law. And maybe I'm wrong in that, but I think that's basically the link that I'm interested in making.
Yes. Okay. If there's a question, we're going to have one last question because we really have to go before it's way too late. So, is there a question? Okay, there it is.
Hi. Mine it's a question for Victoria, but not necessarily only for her, or just like an elaboration, because we've been talking a lot about human rights, but the theme of the whole symposium is that there is not only humans, of course, and I'm wondering whether, and I agree with the critical aspect that you point out on the aspect of human rights. Shouldn't we spend a little bit more also of time or energy talking about not only human rights but also labor rights, because this kind of discourse is like completely being eliminated in the past decades. But I think that maybe is something that is quite relevant, given that we are all nowadays like laborers for a system, just by using social networks, just by using and living and being alive somehow in this world. And also this maybe could also bridge the difference between humans and non-humans, because these machines, like taking the smartphones or all sort of like cameras, whatever, they're actually doing some labor for us and with us, and it also came out quite clear in this presentations that they can be our allies, but also ways of enslaving, of bombing, of controlling, of reducing. So human rights are okay, but should we also talk about like more of like labor rights or this kind of talk? Thanks.
You have one.
Not really. Oh yeah. No, that was also my idea to try to debunk this debate on the Anthropocene, to show the Anthropocene as an occult ideology of labor, where precisely the attempt is like, to remove. But just to bring very material examples, also, discussing this algorithmic complexity. I see specifically in New York, where most of us are living, how this system, this centralized algorithm that are like designed in North California, San Francisco, actually they manage a good part of the life and the logistic of the city of New York. If you think is any service, the Uber, Lyft, Seamless, people that bring you food home, they are just workers that are like employed by an application on their smartphone, controlled by San Francisco, basically. And it's interesting, the class composition, because they are all migrants. They're all Latinos, they're all Chinese, they're all Pakistani. And it's enough, to go out in the street and to see how there is an impact of this, abstract complexity of algorithm. You can use all the sophisticated language you want, but the impact is very material and very flashy. And it's a clear class division that is produced by this new system. So it's just, enough to look around.
Well, in terms of hardware, and I mean, it's a joke. I guess you can laugh at it, but like, I think we can like the trivial version of it will be like, don't abuse your equipment. Don't get angry at your phone and throw it on the ground and break it. But in real policy, I think part of constituting like robotic rights is to constitute laws that says like Apple should not upgrade their phone every year because of the material that has to go to garbage, because of this forced death camp of these iPhones that get produced and get thrown out, right? Like things like that, I think it's more and more like reasonable to think about ways to think of like the rights of technology, but it again relates to environment, because what I'm saying is basically sort of like some kind of respect for those minerals that constitute these machines that we use 1 year and we just toss them out, or like break them and toss them out. But that's all I can think of when I'm thinking of like what are, but I kind of like have written a little bit about this, because if this artificial intelligence is going to emerge, we already have to think about them on some level as equal in order for them to not learn from us our hypocrisies and our duplicities, because those would be replicated in artificial life, like you've seen it in Ex Machina movie, of how the female subject is traumatized to the point that cannot tell the difference between real love by one male character in the film and the kind of like obsessive sexual enslavement by the other, and she ends up killing both at the end for whatever purpose. Yes, so I guess we have to finish. Do you have a few words to say?
Yes. Yeah, Mo, I really would like to thank you and all your guests for this very nice and diverse day, and for all your contributions. And to all the others in the audience, I would say thank you for being here with us, and I hope you will come back tomorrow. Then we'll have the day curated by Anselm Franke. I think he already arrived. I think I spotted him somewhere. Please, if you have time, and stay a bit, because the basic year students will do the third episode of their performance. If you really have to go, of course, you will leave right now. But maybe, maybe you can stay. So.
Thank you so much for having us, like really, the whole institution, everybody who was involved, and you for inviting me to host today.
You are welcome.